Hello and welcome back to A New Nation, discussing the news that matters. My name is Nick Ward and I'm very pleased to introduce my co-host, Nathan Sparling. Say hello, Nathan.
Hello.
And we are delighted to be joined by a lovely guest, which many of you will know, which is the lovely Olly Parker. Say hello, Olly.
Hello.
Hello. So this is the third of our short, it's only meant to be one episode, then it turned to two. Now this is the third of our three-part special into the US elections, but at least we know what has happened. But before we go any further, I just want to do a quick reminder that all the views on this podcast are our own views and not the views of our employers or anyone else for that matter. So if you want their views on the American election, you should go and ask them.
I'm not typing a response to anyone who asks.
Yeah, Nathan is his own employer. So maybe leave
that
Nathan
is a
alone.
matter for the American people.
Lovely, that's a nice answer. So, Olly, who won?
Joe Biden won.
Woo! Yeah! Champagne corks! Woo! That is great news. How did that happen, Olly?
Well, I mean, in the end, some people are saying it wasn't even close, although the margins in a few key states, very, very, very close. It does seem like a few 100,000 votes the other way. Trump could have, again, managed to squeak out a win in the Electoral College, despite being even further behind in the popular vote than he was behind Hillary Clinton at the last election. So we think that Biden's kind of popular vote lead is going to get up to around 5 percentage points, maybe even more than that. He's also managed to win back the blue wall, as the Americans call it, which is the Rust Belt states. And he's also managed to make some inroads into traditional Republican territory, in that he is heavily favored to take back Georgia, and he should also hold Arizona as well. Both those states are still yet to kind of finally be called definitively one way or the other, but increasingly looking like he will win Georgia and also win Arizona, which means he ends up with the exact same number of electoral votes that Donald Trump won when he beat Hillary Clinton, which of course Donald called a landslide. So
what beautiful irony. I don't know about you guys, but when the election was called on Saturday night, a wave of relief came over me. I felt like a big heavy thing had been taken off my chest. It was so great to hear. In fact, I believe we busted out some of the bubbles to celebrate and toast the President of the United States, because, you know, it suddenly felt again like there was hope. It suddenly felt again like the good guys had won, and the good guys haven't won for quite some time. And it, you know, in the very first podcast we had on this, we were talking about who we wanted to win. Obviously, we all said Biden, and I said it was about my faith in democracy. Like I was so concerned that even though this man was such a horror, that people would still vote for him. Now that didn't happen, but 70 million people still did vote for him. So there are definitely underlying issues at play there in American society. Why do you think, this is asking you a very deep question with no preparation, Olly, why do you think there is such a large body of people still in America who, after 4 years of horror, still want to put their faith in Donald Trump?
So some of it is that America is a deeply, deeply, deeply divided country. We can't really underestimate that. So at the end of the day, Donald Trump was the Republican nominee of the Republican Party, and Republicans voted for him. So we can't underestimate that. A lot of it is that. However, his turnout was way up. He inspired people to come to the Republican Party that have never voted for the Republican Party before, not just one, but 2 elections in a row. So I just think there's just so much to unpack there. I think we touched on a little bit of strongman theory last time. I think that's part of it. I think there is a really, really deeply held strong view against any kind of socialism in America. And I don't think we just saw that play out in white conservative America. I think we saw that play out in Latino America as well. I think broadly that's it. I think there's a lot in there around kind of global shifts away from social democratic parties around the white working class that you can point to if you're looking for kind of a higher intellectual kind of interpretation. But at the end of the day, I just think that, you know, he excites people in a way that pollsters, political scientists haven't really bottomed out yet. And I think that's shown by the huge polling miss in the Rust Belt. At the end of the day, although pollsters probably actually pretty close to getting the result right in Pennsylvania, if you look at Ohio, Wisconsin and Michigan, which are kind of the absolute heart of that Rust Belt region, the polls massively underestimated Donald Trump again. And I don't think we're close to unpicking that, actually.
And one of the things that I thought was very interesting is that, I don't know where I saw it, but someone was saying the thing that this election shows us is that actually for the general public, you can get away with being, you know, having a massive ego, being sexist, being racist, all these kind of things, if people think that you're on their side. So it's almost like it doesn't matter that he is a person, is a horrible person. What matters is that he will advocate for things which will advance, or you believe he will, because obviously he probably wouldn't, but you believe he will advocate for things that will advance your station in life, your position, your, you know, your values and your economic stability mixed in together, which in itself is something I think there's an interesting insight there into politics in general, that potentially sometimes we overplay the importance of personality. I don't know, because you could read it as in we either overplay or underplay it, because actually he is so successful because of his personality and because he's presents himself this Rockweiler of, you know, the American Midwest, the ordinary person, the person in a pickup truck and a shotgun. And I think that's a bit, yeah.
I don't know. I think it's really interesting. I think like maybe it's one of those classic times where we're maybe a bit guilty of watching the horse race too much, and maybe assuming that people are actually really following things for the last 4 years. I think, you know, there was a lot of evidence at the last election that the reason people voted Donald Trump and the reason they wanted to give him a go is because he was a businessman. He was from outside mainstream political opinion that people were now against. And I think maybe 4 years down the line, people looked at coronavirus, the recession, maybe they'd heard some of the noise and fury kind of coming out of the White House, and kind of en masse they thought, well, that didn't really work, did it? Let's go the other way this time. Because certainly, you know, if you're looking at the Senate and the House races, there was certainly no like huge rush to the Democratic side. The Republicans have an excellent chance of holding the Senate at the Georgia special elections on January 5th. And also the Republicans gained ground in the House of Representatives as well. So there's certainly no like widespread pushback on kind of the Republican and Trump agenda. But there was pushback on Trump himself. And actually, I don't think we can fall too far down the rabbit hole of analyzing what went right for Trump, because at the end of the day, I think there are only 3 one-term presidents in kind of recent American history, you know, that were voted out after one term. So, you know, that's pretty huge. You know, there aren't many of them. It's massive. Incumbents normally win re-election and they normally last 2 terms. There's a lot of economic evidence out there that suggested that had we not had coronavirus, had the fundamentals, as they're kind of referred to by pollsters, remain the same, Trump would have won. So, you know, clearly, you know, there wasn't that much that went right for Trump. Whilst we can still look at this voting bloc and be worried about it, you know, that is a huge rejection of him and him alone, looking at the results. I mean, clearly there was a slither of split ticket votes. So people that voted for Joe Biden as a kind of safe moderate at the top of the ticket, but then voted Republican down ballot.
It's very interesting to think about sort of him versus Biden, because they are 2 very different presentations of what a president can be. Like, I suppose, like, going back to one of the things you said there before, you know, there's a fear of socialism in America, or things that are associated with socialism. Like, thinking about Biden, is he a socialist? Will he bring in socialist policies? What awaits us in a Biden-Harris administration?
I think that's a really, really good question. So looking at kind of what Joe Biden's three main priorities are going to be. I mean, I think, he's just had a press conference now, which I think has just finished. That was on coronavirus and wearing masks specifically. So I think that gives us a really kind of clear steer. I think, the three main things, if he had won the Senate, would have been, coronavirus from a public health perspective, coronavirus from a rebuilding the economy perspective, and then also a look at reform around like the Supreme Court and everything else. Because I think had he won the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the presidency, he would have needed to get on with that reform really quickly. So I think that would have risen to the top of the agenda. But now I think we're going to see something very, very different. I think, it's unlikely, but not impossible. He will win the Senate. So it's then looking at, well, what can Joe Biden do for the next 2-4 years? What can he really put his kind of wheel behind and use what he called his mandate to try and drive through? And I think it will be a huge focus on those real kind of small core issues to try and drive them through, because he'll need Republican support to do this. So I think an economic relief bill will be top of the agenda as well. I think that will be trillions. I think he will try and burnish some of his sort of left credentials. I think he'll be aware of kind of accusations of socialism, but I think he'll want to do things around the green agenda, green jobs, climate change. We've already seen he's going to rejoin the Paris Accord, for example. So I think there'll be some sort of noise in that direction. A lot of polls show that there's majority support for that, actually. So I don't think there'll be kind of too much blowback, although, again, he will struggle to get these initiatives through the Senate. I think, much more funding for public health initiatives, mask wearing, vaccine rollout, obviously, has come on the agenda as of today. Things like that will be his sort of initial focuses over the next 2 years. But a lot of the stuff that was coming underneath the sort of the left Bernie Sanders agenda, if you will, a lot of that's gone over the next 2 years, actually. A lot of, reform of the courts. Redistricting was obviously something that Democrats really wanted to focus on, as there's a lot of restricting up in states over the next 2 years. So this is redrawing kind of political and constituency boundaries across different states. Trying to use English terminology and UK terminology there to explain it. Apologies. I think that will be the top of his agenda. But without the Senate, it's going to be a real struggle to get some of those like really kind of key totemic socialist, quote unquote, policies through.
So what we've seen over the last couple of days is, and I want to touch on this before we get too much into what's to come, is the different images that we've seen. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris coming up and, acting very presidential. And then where you are right now, Ollie, we had the very famous press conference in the Four Seasons, not the Four Seasons Hotel, the Four Seasons landscaping, almost backyard. And I really wanted us to talk about this, what the hell happened that they had a press conference in between a dildo shop and a mortuary. But
What?
that was the next door to the Four Seasons landscaping, was a sex shop and a funeral director's. Or
why would you not just cancel it once you realize you'd done it and be like, nope, sorry, no press conference here? Why would you?
But some people are saying it was only Donald Trump that got that made the mistake, and actually it was always planned for here. But there's been some massive digging around the owners of the Four Seasons, and they are not normal Republicans. Like they've slagged Trump off on social media before, so it does sound to me like it's been a total mistake, and they've just made something happen. What are your thoughts, Ollie?
I agree. I mean, for those that are watching on YouTube, I am in front of Four Seasons Total Landscape now. The mortuary is opposite me. The dildo shop is to my right. And it was a remarkable moment, a really, really remarkable moment. Because what's more, the press conference was scheduled unbeknown 5 minutes after they called the race for Biden. So you just had this footage of Rudy Giuliani speaking to a slowly emptying parking lot as journalists walked away to do their pieces to camera about Biden winning. And it was, it was just a mistake, wasn't it? Somebody's booked the wrong parking lot and they've just bad on it. I mean,
You know-
even worse, the person they put forward to talk about this conspiracy about observers not being allowed to watch the count in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, specifically, which has already been widely debunked, by the way. There is absolutely no truth in this. It turns out that he was a Republican that's perennially stood for election in New Jersey. And people aren't sure when he moved from New Jersey to Pennsylvania, or indeed if he has moved from New Jersey to Pennsylvania. And it also turns out, and we shouldn't laugh at this, it also turns out he's a convicted sex offender.
Of course, that's who it was.
Wow.
Yeah.
So a reliable source there for the Republicans.
Yeah. So a convicted sex offender who may not live in Pennsylvania fronted a press conference at a garden centre car park in the outskirts of Philadelphia. And that's what Trump is basing his current legal fight on.
You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the dying days of the Iraq War, where it was like the Iraqi information minister was suddenly having hastily press conferences on bridges and saying that, you know, the Iraqi army is winning the war as like US Abrams tanks were rolling in behind him. It's a bit like that. It's a bit like the regime has fallen away, but what's shocking is they're still in the White House. So like the fact that they've made a sort of a cock up like this, it's just typical, but it also just shows the sense of crisis that they must have about how they were so quickly losing the narrative. And then as soon as it was called, you know, I think it's amazing the power of the networks in some respects to be able to do this, because as soon as it was called, they became irrelevant, actually, it felt very quickly. And all of the chat was then about the Biden-Harris ticket, how incredible it was. He'd run for that 3 times, and on his 3rd attempt that he was successful, or that, you know, she will be the first person of color in the White House as vice president, which is just, and the first woman as well, which is just, you know, incredible. And all became about that, and it just very quickly felt like him and his gang were just yesterday's news.
Yeah, I mean, you know, never has the phrase, you know, in office but not in power felt so apt as Donald Trump being currently sat in the White House. It's, you know,
or on his golf course.
It feels like it's fallen away. I mean, let's look, you know, he has a message around the election being fake, and we've spoken a lot about, is this just Trump setting himself up for like a media empire thing after the election, which I still think is very much on the table and kind of in their thinking. But I do just think, you know, we can't like sort of focus too much on just how well Biden has managed to seize the narrative, and just by coming on TV and looking presidential night after night has really seized the narrative. And then also, you know, what are the options Trump now has for pushing this conspiracy message? The networks, as you've said quite rightly, have just basically stopped, you know, listening to him. And basically, you know, during his press conference, some networks cut away from it because they were inaccurate. They refused to read out his press statements because they say they're inaccurate. Twitter has started blocking his tweets. You know, there's actually not that many mass mediums for him now to get out this message. So, you know, going back to what we were saying about how the majority of most Americans, you know, the election was just a day. They went out there, they voted, now they've got on with their lives. You know, they've seen the headline saying Biden's won. That's probably it for the vast majority of them. You know, on we go. And it's just how much of this core where Trump can kind of keep the flame alive, really.
I want to...
We're just seeing on Twitter that he's apparently told advisors, this is Trump, has told advisors that he's thinking about running for president in 2024.
Yeah, it's been around a lot, yeah.
Well, he'd be the same age as Joe Biden is now, wouldn't he, but then?
But that is the first sort of indication, I think, that we've had that maybe he's started to understand that he has definitely lost this time.
I agree with that. I also think another really clear indication came with the Wisconsin count. Bizarrely in American politics, candidates need to pay for the recount. And it's $3 million in Wisconsin to have your recount paid for. And the Trump campaign isn't going to pay it, basically. So I think, you know, when you actually have to put cash on the table, you know, I think that's the point where you can see, okay, you know, do you really have your money where your mouth is? And that they're clearly not going to put $3 million down, which in the context of, you know, the multi-billion-dollar presidential race, $3 million. This is going to sound awful, but it's not that much in the grand context of a presidential race. I think the fact that they're not putting that money down, I think shows you where the priority kind of really is. It's more about the media battle than it is about anything real.
Mm. You know, I found the emails that they were sending really distasteful. Like,
why have you not helped?
Why have you not helped? And like these really angry fundraiser emails for the Trump Defense Fund that were sent out. But like, he's a billionaire, like an actual billionaire. Why are you asking this person on like minimum wage in Arkansas to pay for your defense fund?
Paper billionaire.
We don't actually know how rich he is because he's never published his tax returns.
Also, if you look at the small print, half the money that you donate is going to pay off his campaign debts.
Really?
Yeah.
And just to say, touching on political science for a second, a lot of analysts have found that actually those sorts of emails where you call people out, why haven't you donated yet? We know you haven't donated, tend to be the most successful.
They work.
It's desperate last stand stuff again that we're seeing.
I would never donate.
No, neither would I.
The party I'm a member of sent me a message that said, why have you not donated? I'd be like, you're not getting my money now.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a moment to go through, Ollie, your predictions, and let's see if we can get. Now, Nathan, can you keep a score of how many he gets right?
Yes.
You're right. Okay, so we're going to start. Yeah, so we're going to
be accountable.
So we're going to start. So at the end, I want to know how many out of these ones he's got correct. So I don't know how many there's going to be because I can't count them all up yet. So just a little bit of work for you, Nathan. Sorry about that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to jump to the Rust Belt. You said that Biden would win Wisconsin and Michigan. Did he do so?
Yeah.
You also said that he would win Ohio.
No, I didn't.
What does this word say then? Fine, let's skip that.
I'm sure you said that. I'm sure you said he could win Ohio.
He could. The polls said he could, but huge miss up there.
Okay, so are we not giving you that? Are we pretending that you didn't? Like, what are we doing with that one?
You didn't say that.
Okay, fine. Oh God, he's a bit like Trump himself, isn't he? It's like it's not.
So you can go and check. So I published it on Twitter, so people can go and check. So I posted it for the election.
Okay, I think your Twitter account is locked though, Ollie.
No, you
people.
Following.
Okay.
I'm going to go back and watch the first video just to clarify.
Just to confirm. So with Pennsylvania, you made it very clear that it was a tipping point state. You said that Trump needs it, and then you said you thought it would go to Biden, but you wouldn't be hugely surprised if it went to Trump. But it did go to Biden, so you got that. So that's correct. So let's go to the Sun Belt and see what you got there. It's a phrase that I've never really heard before until you introduced it to me, and now I use it constantly. I said to my dad the other day, let's go on a holiday to the Sun Belt, which was interesting. And then I said, as long as you pay. So the first one that you got, I think, was correct, and it very much contrasts to what Nathan thought was happening on the night, is that you correctly predicted that Florida was going to go Trump, which was correct. And I've also got there.
It did look at the time like it was going to go to Biden.
On the night, Nathan kept texting me constantly going, oh, Florida, oh, look at Florida. And I kept saying, no, it's not done yet. Don't get my hopes up. Stop it. And then he
blamed me for it going red.
Well, I told him to stop it, and then he didn't stop it, and then it went to Trump. And so the only logical conclusion is that that's Nathan's fault. And also, some of the things that happened in the South with potentially some Cubans. So we should think about that. North Carolina, you said would go to Biden, and it did not go to Biden, Ollie. And Georgia, you said would go to Trump, but we don't know if it has gone to Trump or not. So maybe you just got those ones mixed up.
I think Biden's won Georgia, which is massive. He hasn't won. They haven't called North Carolina either officially, but I think Trump will win North Carolina. So yeah, basically my thinking was I thought he was going to win one of the Sun Belt states. I didn't think it would be Florida or Texas. I went for North Carolina over Georgia. I was wrong. And had I been watching closely, I would have seen that actually the campaign spent its final night in the Sun Belt, at least, in Georgia over North Carolina. So, had I been paying more attention.
What I found interesting is right now Alaska has still not actually been called.
Does anyone care? There's like 2 votes.
Sarah Palin cares.
They're all going to Trump. Next! Who even needs this democracy thing, if you ask me? You said, Ollie, that Texas was going to go to Trump, which is what happened. But you said something was happening there. And then you said Arizona was going to go to Biden. And if he got Arizona, then he'd have a really clear path to victory, which is what happened. And then we get some slightly random states, which I've got also random notes for, so we'll see what this was. So we came to Maine, that you said was one of the first to vote, and you said it would be, if because it's a weird electoral system, if it went to the Democrats, it would indicate that it would be a good night for the Democrats. Who did Maine go to?
It was actually the one specific congressional district in Maine, which if it went to Biden, then it would have been a blowout for Biden, because it would have just meant that he would have easily won Pennsylvania, easily won the Rust Belt. But
it didn't go to Biden.
It didn't. And it was, by the Electoral College, a lot closer than that.
Oh, yeah. And then New Hampshire, you said we should be really worried if that's too close to call.
But it wasn't.
It
took them a little while to call it, which was the bit that gave me heart palpitations at the start of the night.
Yeah.
But it went relatively quickly, and then I was just like, okay, I feel better now.
Brilliant. So what is Ollie's score, Nathan?
7 right and 2 wrong.
Way! So 7 out of 9 is a pretty good score. That is pretty impressive. So we'll have you back on in 4 years' time, and we'll compare. We'll compare, and if you make an improvement on your predictions, we'll send you a cake in the post. That sounds fair. Are you happy?
Wrong. You're not including Ohio, are you?
No, I didn't include Ohio. I could have, because I think that you did say Ohio, but I didn't. I chose not to include Ohio in that.
He's so generous, isn't he? So
I
generous.
think I'm quite generous. I think I should be the one that's responsible for the US elections, because I'd be like, who are these votes for? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Could you go tell Arizona and Nevada, please?
Yeah, hurry up.
So, I think with the last sort of bit of
in
conversation,
defense, Georgia and North Carolina, the two I got wrong, were very, very close. We're talking like percentage point.
Well, you still got them wrong. So
yeah, but I just want some cake.
yeah, no, that's next time, Ollie. I don't have any cake this time. Like, I'm not going to overpromise and underdeliver this time. I'm going to promise for next time. So, just before we sort of wrap ourselves up, if we just take a bit of a zoom out and we sort of look at the wider situation. So, Donald Trump has often been characterized, and I think you mentioned this before, Ollie, as a strong man. So, he is a person who is elected, who talked to a working class base, who used language that perhaps we thought or wished had been sort of put back to another time, who invoked nationalism and patriotism to get what they wanted, and used some of the classic tropes of fascism that we've seen in history. So other people that we might consider to be strongmen are people like Putin, who have used Russian nationalism to bolster their position. Some of the people, Viktor Orban in Hungary, for example, as well. And of course, some people have tried to say our Prime Minister, Boris Trump, has fashioned himself similar, but I'm not quite sure if I would agree with that. What do you think this shows us? And I suppose this is to both of you. What does this show us about the sort of the state of the world and the age of the strongman, or the second age of the strongman, effectively? Like, are there lessons that we can take from this American election going forward?
I think there will always be, in any democracy, people that rally to, a leader that can, project power and stability in a weird way. Because I know we associate strong men with sort of instability and, war and what have you. But actually it's about like that kind of very clear, safe, your interests are my interests, America first, that kind of strength and stability that certain leaders can project. I think there will always be a constituency in any democracy that warms to that and wants to vote for that. Personally.
And are they always on the right?
I think that's interesting. I think they look different in a social democratic context, but I definitely think, you wouldn't use the phrase strong man, but there was certainly that aura of Tony Blair in like 97 to 2005 of just that like winner, that like that person that sort of every man could connect with and could just, you know, basically project power, stability, above the party in a way. You know, people put him ahead of Labour, if that makes sense.
Well, a lot of people said that they voted for Tony Blair, they didn't vote for the Labour Party.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
You know, I do think, you know, there will always be a constituency in any democracy that wants that will search for that.
And it's interesting, actually. Tony Blair's a really good example because there's some people in the Labour Party who are obsessed with Tony Blair, like unhealthily obsessed with and idolize him and, you know, put him up on this pedestal, which is a never good thing to do for any leader. But, you know, it is almost a personality cult and it is about the individual, which is true.
Yeah, and it often leads to people getting into weird factional fights where they're putting this weird kind of creed above, like, well, anything else really. You know, when you know, it's like the odds. What we were saying about how Trump could kind of convince people of the lie. You know, like, you know, I think you get a lot of that with sort of leaders that have inspired this kind of little base, is that you end up with like your followers just automatically making excuses for you and just always thinking that you have the best of intentions and sort of explaining things for you in ways that just become so like.
You see it in Scotland, I think. You know, you do see that in Scotland around the last two SNP leaders, where there's a constituency of people that like they could do no wrong.
Yeah.
And you even saw that, you know, when someone was up in court, like there was still people outside of the court cheering him, regardless of whether or not the accusations were real. So I think we've got a lot of those examples here.
Parallel in my corner of the world, not Four Seasons Total Landscape. And I'm back in the UK.
And like, you know, how much damage did Donald Trump do to the democratic institutions of America? Because that's always a danger, right? If you don't have strong institutions, then a strong man or woman, whoever they might be, can come along and they can break it effectively because they are stronger than the institutions. And then they can ultimately, like we saw in Russia, where the institutions were very new and very weak, they can ultimately break the system and become the system. How close were we with Donald Trump to that in America? How would we rate the institutions of the American Republic in dealing with someone like this?
I think they've just come under huge pressure, and I think they're still under pressure. I don't think we're entirely out of the woods, but I think they've come under huge pressure and they've held up relatively well. But I think you ask a really interesting question, which is what are the democratic norms that Americans will now not see as important? So it used to be there was huge like liberal pushback, media pushback whenever politicians violated something called the Hatch Act. So the Hatch Act is like, essentially it's like impropriety in government, not using like government property and government roles to like push political campaigns, essentially is what the Hatch Act is. Massively oversimplified, but you know, I'll get to my point. And basically you had Donald Trump using the White House as the backdrop for the Republican convention. And people are like, oh, this is incomplete, you know, this completely contravenes the Hatch Act. And it seems that Americans just didn't really care that the president was using the White House for his political rally. So I'm wondering, like, whilst our overall institutions, the overall American institutions managed to hold, essentially, are there kind of some other norms like that where actually it turns out Americans didn't really care about? So, you know, could we see Biden, for example, going, well, actually, like, although I have projected myself as the candidate that's going to return to normal, one of you know, his famous quotes was, you know, you won't have to worry about what I post on Twitter, you know, for example. Like, that was one of the things he would say quite often. You know, will he just go, well, no, yeah, maybe using the White House as a backdrop for a few political rallies is quite a nice idea, actually. You know, are there going to be kind of the lower order norms like that we might now see, you know, just slowly fade into the background? Because it seems Americans, you know, didn't really see that as any kind of deal breaker.
And definitely one of the norms that feels like has been changed is the sort of the dignity of the office. And I suppose this is the danger of a presidential system, in that, you know, you are also head of state, you're not just head of government. And it almost feels like under Trump, the prestige of the presidency was significantly reduced. And almost the way that people treated it changed, you know, when you had, you know, reporters shouting out to him, "Why are you doing this?" And the back and forth, almost the mysticism and the prestige of the institution has seriously been tarnished. Now, it might be that someone like Joe Biden, that has a gravitas and sort of a respectability of his own, will recover that. But like you say, I almost wonder, like, once something has gone like that, I think it's very difficult to recover it.
I agree. And actually, if we're looking at kind of longer term historical trends, a lot of people say that actually the start of the presidency eroded. They go back to LBJ and Nixon, the start of like the downward trend, when the president started being seen less as a head of state, like the Queen, the president's word is good, down to like the more kind of polarized democracy we have today. People have said that is a relatively steady trend, one which clearly Trump has, accelerated hugely. But people say there's a lot of historical precedents to what you just said.
Interesting stuff. For me, the thing that I take away from it is that strong men and women can still be defeated in electoral systems. That if your institutions can hold, then you can still fingers crossed and touching wood, you can still defeat them, and that you can still convince people of the righteousness of the conversations about the soul of America and things. I think there's an element of truth about that, and I think it worked, and it was right. And the division that you saw was because the question actually was so fundamental, because the question was actually about what is our country going forward and what does that country look like. And that brought out huge amounts of people on either side. And that's what made it so close, because the question is so key and so critical. And I think there's real hope in that. But the question is for other countries, so thinking places like Hungary, but places like Poland, which is starting to see some of its liberal institutions really under attack as well, is how long can they resist for? Because you're starting to see generations of strong men effectively. And at some point, I think, with democracy, it does stop working if the institutions that it relies upon have been completely eroded away. So, like, there's hope and a warning there.
One of the interesting things that I've seen that this week, one of the next steps of the presidency are for the Biden transition team to get its money from government to start work. And it can't get that money until a Trump's appointed administrator of the General Services Administration signs a bit of paper to say that they know that Biden's going to win, which seems, you wouldn't really get that in this country, because of the civil service being non-partisan.
Yeah.
Whereas you go to America and, Trump has appointed someone who's now, essentially at his behest to not ascertain this victory for Biden, meaning they're being strangled of $10 million, that won't allow that transition to happen yet, even though it's quite clear who should have won. So that's another one of those sort of things that should happen quite easily, but given it's a Trump appointed person, it could wait until Trump's happy to concede before that process starts.
But that's really interesting itself, right? The over-democratization of the American system actually puts it more at risk. You're totally right. Because on the one hand, you're like, well, actually, it's much better than our system. You don't have this permanent civil service who, have their own views and things. It's much more transparent. But on the other hand, you remove one of the institutions that's there to protect the democratic system, theoretically. And yeah, I just think it's really interesting. It's almost like all things in life, someplace in the middle is best. Who knew?
Independent judiciary is huge, right? We can't overestimate how that does. That rule of law is just so important. And I mean, like, I'm going to go quite random and off the charts here, but I was once in Ghana at a round table about like promoting business in Ghana, and basically they went around the table and they were saying, like, what is your biggest concern as a Ghanaian businessman about, like, managing to, like, build your business? I'm talking quite a while ago now, by the way. I'm talking like sort of 15 years or so ago. And to a man, every single like businessman, their biggest concern was actually contract implementation in the courts. And you just have to see just how important that is to a functioning society, to have that security that if you go into a contract with somebody, the courts will have your back and they can't be bribed and they can't kind of pull away from that. And I never want to use the phrase too much democracy, but elected judges just does, maybe it's the Brit in me. Maybe it just made me feel very uncomfortable that a judge could be elected and picked on a political slate, whether it be Democrat or Republican.
Agreed. All right, let's wrap ourselves up there, guys. Now, because we've had Olly on for 3 episodes, we definitely wanted to make sure that we gave him the honour and the privilege and the pleasure of making his recommendations of things to check out. So from next week, we're going to be back to normal business. We'll have
later this week.
So what we've on about on Thursday or Friday, we'll be back to normal business. We'll have a different guest who isn't Olly. So why are you even going to tune in? Who knows? But Olly, it's been such a pleasure to have you. And I think without you, we would have known nothing and we would have been rambling idiots. And what you also did is that you, for the first time ever, really got me engaged in an American election, because I felt that I had information to look out for. I knew, to check out Florida. I knew that Pennsylvania was going to be important. I'd never had that before. So previously I just thought it was a fun excuse to sit and drink with my mates. But, that wasn't possible, but for the first time I was really engaged in the podcast. So thank you for that. And I'm sure our listeners want to thank you as well for your great knowledge and your more than mediocre predictions.
Well, thank you for having me and putting up with these 3 whole episodes. I'm really looking forward to the recommendations bit, actually. Do you do West Wing reenactments sort of every week? Or is that...
No, that's just that was just a special.
No, I'm just going to say, that was just absolutely perfect. It was like the cross between, hardcore Politico content and Alan Partridge doing Bond. And I'm just here for that. And I really
don't think my enactment was that bad.
Well, thank you, Olly, for that. That's beautiful. What would you like to recommend to our listeners and viewers?
All right. Well, if Trump had won, I would have recommended a really nice folk album by Adrian Linker, who's the lead singer of a band called Big Thief. It's really, really nice and mellow and takes you away from the horribleness of the world. But as Biden won, I've decided to go with a film which you can find on YouTube, which was the inspiration for Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror.
Ooh.
And it's a film called Threads. It's from the 1970s. And a friend of mine put it best when he said it sort of starts out like a sort of Ken Loach sort of 1970s, recession, broken families piece. And then it just turns into Black Mirror style dystopian future. So it's essentially, the central thesis is what would happen if there was a nuclear attack on Sheffield.
Oh, it's famous. I've heard of this before.
Very famous. And you can watch it for free on YouTube. And it's quite a seminal text. And it's fantastic. Like, given how low budget it is, how dark it is, it's just something that's really, really interesting to watch. As I say, it's quite bleak. But given that Biden's won, I think we can all kind of
we can handle it.
We can do some bleak.
Utopian. But I watched it. Basically, one of the awesome things that's come out of COVID-19 for me is that some friends and I filmed a bit of a film club that sort of meets and talks every week. And this was one of my friend's recommendations, and he recommended it right at the start of the outbreak. And the trauma of it has been too much for the rest of the film club. We describe ourselves as still not over it. So if you can steel yourself, this is like a great kind of seminal thing to watch. The final thing I'll say about it before moving on is that the guy who wrote it is quite kind of a famous sort of TV playwright who's done quite a few of these sort of TV plays on the BBC, as they were called back then in the 70s. And he said every time one was shown, he would get loads of phone calls from his friends the next day saying, "Oh, I saw that last night. That was brilliant. Well done. That was absolutely fantastic." And the day after they showed Threads on BBC for the first time, he had silence. Absolutely nothing. Nobody phoned him, because it is just quite striking. And the whole, like, when the supply chain breaks down and there are people at supermarkets scrambling for food, it's just all quite on the nose right now. So, but with Biden, with the good news about a vaccine today, I think we're ready for it. And so that's my recommendation.
Great. Thank you, Olly. That was so good. That was
not
wonderful.
sure I'm ready.
No,
I'd like to recommend Love Island.
You know, however you think of Love Island, just right at the other end of the spectrum. That's
Right.
I'd like to recommend a weird movie.
Go on then.
It's a HBO movie. It's one of my favorite political movies of all time, and it's called Game Change. And it's about Sarah Palin, and Sarah Palin is played by Julianne Moore, and I cannot actually tell the difference between Sarah Palin and Julianne Moore. It's like the best thing ever. Have you ever seen it, Nick?
No. How do we watch it? What can we watch it
You
on?
can buy it on YouTube, I think, or Amazon Prime. I think it's on Amazon Prime for a couple of pounds. It's worth every pound. It's also about someone eventually conceding a presidential election. But it is amazing. And if you ever wanted to know why Alaska had foreign trade links with Russia, then it's because you could see Russia from Sarah Palin's house in Alaska.
It's a brilliant film. Brilliant.
You can see Russia from my house. It's a dream.
Lovely.
Yeah, the contrast between Donald Trump and John McCain at this time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's been lots of chats about that.
You know, doing John McCain from Arizona senator. Arizona's just gone the other way, so a topical pick, but it's really good. Like, you don't have to be a politico to like it. It's a great film.
That was great fun.
Great.
What's your recommendation, Nick?
Mine's is not a film or music. Mine's is a thing. So a little thing that probably no one's heard of called Alexa. And what Alexa does is an automated voice assistant from Amazon. I've recently moved
Not
glasses.
an ad.
Not an ad, yeah, but it could be Amazon if you're listening. Jeff Bezos,
She's
happy to take that Amazon money.
Alexa is listening to anything you're saying right now.
Yeah. We'll get a little note through the door. As viewers will know, I recently moved house, and one of the things that I did in my new flat was I decided to proper Alexa it up, based on something that my friends Paddy and Martin had done. So I bought myself a set of plugs and a set of lights, and I set up all these routines, and it's just so great. So it's like, in the morning, I say, "Good morning, Alexa." It turns on the kitchen light and the dining room light. It puts on Radio 4, and it tells me an interesting fact. When I'm going out of the house, I say, "Alexa, I'm going out." It turns off the lights. It turns on the alarm. It's just great. When I say, "Alexa, good night," it turns off all the lights except for the bedroom lamp lights, and then we can just turn them off in there. It sounds like such a small thing. It is such a small thing, but it's also so friggin' cool. It is like I'm in Star Trek, and I love it. I just think I just love it. So if you're in any way geeky, just buy yourself some of these light bulbs because they're so easy to set up, and especially, and it just gives such joy. It sparks joy, as Mary Condon would say to me. Obviously, I'm a little bit concerned that Jeff Bezos can hear everything that I say all the time. But luckily, I know that it's all a bunch of rubbish, so he probably isn't getting very much out of that. And that's my recommendation.
Well, if Jeff Bezos was a listener to this podcast, then I guess we're doing something right.
Yeah, I don't think he is.
If only we could maybe get, like 0.5% of his wealth, just 0.5% of his wealth today.
This hour,
probably set
potentially.
me up for quite some time.
I don't know what we'd spend it on, Nathan. More Alexa light bulbs.
I have spent the money I would win in every different type of lottery so many times over. That's like my favorite game to play. Is we put on a lucky dip at the lottery. What will we spend the winnings on? The money just doesn't go far enough.
No, it does not. No, it does not.
Well.
So, on that note, we'll wrap ourselves up. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Olly, for being our wonderful guest. Thank you, Nathan, for being a wonderful co-host.
Thank you, Nick.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Please check out our social media stuff. You can follow us at Annunation Pod on Twitter or on Facebook now as well. You can also watch this podcast if you're listening to it on YouTube. If you type in Annunation, you'll find us. It's got our lovely faces on it. Although if
you
you're
can
listening,
send us
you
some.
won't know what our faces look like.
You can send us some suggestions, and please make it better than the only current email suggestion that we've had, which was some random sort of CBD oil manufacturer from America who's clearly only found us from the YouTube channel when we did an American election special.
Yeah, that was interesting. It was him promoting his wife. It wasn't even him. It was him saying, "I think you should have my wife on." I was like, "Oh, maybe." I don't know. So yeah, please send us suggestions as well. Thank you so much for listening to these specials. I hope you found them informative and useful. We've had a great time doing them. And again, massive thank you to you, Ollie, for keeping us so informed. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next time.